Hey everybody! So, I had a few people ask me to make a comment about C Sharp in 2016, 2017. So C Sharp is a language that Microsoft put together in, I believe, the late 90s, 1998, 99 if I recall, perhaps 1999. And C Sharp is basically Microsoft's answer to Java, but they made moves to try to improve upon Java with C Sharp, and they did at the time to a certain extent. There were some nice things about the C Sharp language, but that was a long time ago, and I'm sure Java and the C Sharp crews have gone back and forth to try to improve upon each other's languages, to one-up each other. And today they are both very good languages, but they have different use cases to a certain extent. So C Sharp, as far as I know, is used in two areas, used in the .NET framework. There are other languages in .NET. .NET was trying to come up with this idea that you could write apps in several .NET languages. I think they had JavaScript.NET, if I recall. It's been a while. They definitely had VB.NET, they had C Sharp.NET, and perhaps others. So it's been a while. I did write a C Sharp app back when .NET was in its late beta stages. And what I did is I actually ported a Java app that I had written, a web app, and I ported it to C Sharp.NET. I actually started with VB.NET just to try it out, and I dumped that pretty quickly because all VB.NET was just .NET with VB syntax, which was much more verbose than C Sharp.NET. So I just stuck to C Sharp.NET, and probably was influenced by the fact that I was a Java coder at the time. So C Sharp is still widely used for .NET web app creation. It's also used in game creation with something called the Unity framework, and I believe Microsoft puts that out. I've never done any Unity coding. Let me just summarize by saying, from what I recall back in the day, C Sharp is a fine language. It has its advantages, it has its disadvantages, just like every other programming language in the world. I am, if people have not figured it out already, I am very much language agnostic when it comes to programming languages, well, any languages really. And the reason I am is because I found in my career that different languages, different frameworks, different APIs lend themselves to different situations. So there's always pros and cons. I would pick a language based on whatever circumstances happen to be at the time. So for instance, when I was a freelance software developer, I would pick languages I would work in based on what the client wanted, based on what the project needed. I wasn't a guy who said, I just write Java, that's all. Everything I do is Java, or I just write PHP, or I just write .NET, that kind of thing. No, I just chose whatever language the project demanded. So when you're choosing your programming languages, I always advise two things. Number one, you choose the type of programming that you want to do, because certain languages will pull you in a certain direction. So for instance, if you want to do web apps for small businesses, do small business development as a freelancer, chances are PHP, Wordpress, PHP Laravel, PHP Drupal, these sorts of things are probably where you're going to make a lot of money. That's where the demand is. On the other hand, if you want to get into mobile development, of course, you have either Java for Android, or you get iOS or Swift rather for iOS. Again, it depends on the type of work you want to do. I can go on and on and on and on, as I have in other videos where I talk about specific use cases for a particular language. A use case is basically just where you would use that language. With regards to the other factor, is to look at, besides the type of work you want to do, is whether there are jobs or opportunities available to you where you happen to live. In my part of the world, I don't know where you live. You could be in India, you could be in China, you could be in Europe, you could be in US, Canada, who knows. And even within a particular country, you may find certain geographical areas will have a certain proclivity towards a certain language. So, you may find in Southern California, they do a lot of Python and Ruby. And you may find in New York, they do a lot of PHP. I don't know. So what you have to do is, when you're looking at software development, is A, figure out what kind of software development you want to do. C++ programming is a very different animal than Python programming, for instance. And number two, you have to look at what are the opportunities in your area. So yeah, back to C#. Is it good? Oh yeah, it's a great language. Just like Java is great. Just like Ruby is great. Just like Python is great. Just like PHP is great. Just like, so many other languages are great, depending on the circumstance that you happen to be in. So those are two issues I would look at when considering C#. I would look around, see if there are any C# opportunities in your area, and then B, then look at the type of programming that you would be doing with C# and seeing if you'd want to do that. That's pretty much my advice on C#. So again, let me bring in the last point, being language agnostic and realizing that the programming language is irrelevant in many respects in terms of you as a programmer. The programming language is only relevant in terms of jobs, opportunities, and the type of work you want to do. All these languages have their pros and their cons, so it really depends what it is you're going to do. So let me give you an example of my language agnostic sensibilities. Now, besides the fact in my career as a freelance developer, I would jump around from language to language depending on the project. Also, let's talk about now. So I have an app where it is PHP based. It was originally written with the CodeIgniter MVC framework, and at its time it was great. But it had its problems, and eventually even the CodeIgniters people just basically sold it off, and they said we had enough of that. So we have this old app that is very solid though, pretty much bug-free, but we needed to expand upon it, but we had a pretty old framework. So what do? We jumped over to another framework called Laravel, which is a much more modern PHP framework, modeled to a certain extent after Ruby on Rails. And so we used Laravel to help modernize and to speed up some aspects of the old CodeIgniter app. So this is all PHP, of course. So you see, I was not like married to CodeIgniter. I saw an advantage with the Laravel framework. So I said, okay, we're going to use Laravel. We're going to use Laravel to create microservices. And we fed the old app to microservices, and we were able to really improve a lot about this application. So for the last couple of years, we've been thinking about a rewrite. At some point, and I'm not saying we'll do it this year or next year or even the year after, I don't know. But at some point, apps can get so old that you may have to rewrite. Although this is the last bloody thing you want to do with app development, because when you rewrite an app from scratch because your old code base is so old, you're usually replacing one set of bugs for another. Not usually, you always are. But sometimes the infrastructure of an old app is just something that is too much, and you just got to let it go. Sometimes you got to make that decision. The biggest example that I can think of is with Mac OS. When Mac OS hit version 9, I believe that was written in Pascal. It had all kinds of fundamental problems with the core engine of Mac OS. So Steve Jobs took the very brave decision at the time to say, we're going to dump that, and we're going to go with a whole new Mac OS, which was based on FreeBSD, which was a type of Unix. And so they went Mac OS 10, which is a total brand new rewrite from scratch, and they dumped the old OS 9. But this is after many, many, many years that they took this decision. They only took the decision because OS 9, basically, its heart was not up to spec with modern computing. So yeah, you do this. You do this very rarely. Do a rewrite from scratch. So I'm looking at this app where it's PHP based, and it's still it's really, really good now. Right? The core engine is great. Because we've used Laravel, we've been able to breathe new life into it. It's super fast. It works fantastic. It's a real good app. But you go down into the dungeons of the app, and there are some things about it that I wouldn't want to touch. You got multiple developers involved, and code just gets messy. That's normal in software development. So at some point, I may, and I'm not saying I will, I may pull the trigger on a rewrite. Will it be in PHP? It might, but I'm actually considering writing it in Python for a whole bunch of reasons, which I won't get into now, but I see some advantages in writing it in Python. Not coding advantages per se, it's more about business advantages. And that's another thing. When you're looking at writing your own apps or writing an app, you have to also consider the business implications of choosing a particular framework or language. So for instance, if you are developing a new app and you're using an older framework that seems to be losing its steam, you may not want to do that. You may want to maybe use a much more popular framework or environment, something that you know that has a much longer lifespan. Because the worst thing you can do is base your product on some other framework or API or something that's basically shutting down. That's terrible. I've been there in the past, back in the old Java days. So there you go. That's the end of that. I really went on a tangent on this one. So to close, C#, very good language, like so many others. It could be used in web app creation in the .NET framework. It could be used in game creation with the Unity framework, and perhaps in other places as well. So there you go. Just check out the job opportunities. Check out to make sure that it's the type of work that you want to do. That's pretty much it. Ciao, ciao.